Okay, so let's look at balancing our chemical reactions. Now, a couple of reminders. One of the things you're going to want you to keep in mind is what we've talked about already, and you already have practice on a little bit, is minoh. Okay, so when we talk minoh, we're talking metals. Okay, remember that is everything on the left-hand side of the periodic table. We're dealing with ions. In this sense, we're talking about polyatomic ions. So break down the word. Poly, okay, polyatomic. Poly means many. Atomic means atom. So when we talk about polyatomic ions or many atom ions, we're talking about things like NO3, CO3, OH. We're talking about ions that come from many atoms. Now the N is a nonmetal. Notice that oxygen and hydrogen are left out. So when we talk a nonmetal, we're talking everything on the right. We're talking about carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, etc. Okay, O is easy, that's my oxygen. And H is hydrogen. Now the only rule to remember when we deal with minoh is that if the same element is in multiple compounds on the same side, like both reactants or both products, you balance it last. Okay, so first example, we have AlOH3, H2SO4, Al2SO4, 3H2O. Okay, so let's keep this simple. First and foremost, you have to recognize what do you need to balance. So I'm going to start with, if I follow minoh, okay, minoh, then I have to be dealing with my metals. Well, aluminum's my metal. I have no other metals. So ions, do I have something that's the same on both sides? Well, I have an OH here, but I don't recognize OH over here, so I'm going to pretend I'm going to say it's not on both sides. I do have an SO4 here, and I have an SO4 here. So I can see, okay, here's SO4, here's SO4, so I do have something that's the same on both sides. So I'm going to write it out over here. Then next is nonmetals. Well, my nonmetals, the S is accounted for in the SO4, so there's no nonmetals, so I go to oxygen. Okay, so oxygen next, and then hydrogen. Well, I have hydrogen here and hydrogen here. Okay, so we count. Reactants, products. So aluminum, I have 1 in the reactants, and I have 2 in the products. So the first thing I have to do is I have to put a 2 here to balance it. So now I have 2. SO4s, well, I have 1 in the reactants. I have 3 in the products. So first thing I got to do is I got to add a 3 here and a 3 there. So far so good. Now I get to oxygen. Okay, well I have, we've run into something. This is what you want to recognize when we're looking at this. Okay, I have a 3 here and I have a 2 here, meaning I have multipliers. So when I look at this, I have to recognize that that 3 is times whatever's in the parentheses, plus it's then further multiplied by 2. So I have 3 times 1 is 3, times 2, I actually have 6 oxygens. So I come over here, I only have 1 oxygen. Now notice I'm ignoring the SO4. SO4, all the O's in the SO4 are accounted for, so I'm just focusing on the O. This is the O. I only have 1 over there, so I need to, lowest common multiple, I put a 6 there. Now I have a 6. So now, okay, let's look at our hydrogen. Okay, hydrogen, I have again the same thing as before, 3 times 1 times 2, so I have 6. But don't forget I also have this over here. I have plus 3 times 2 is 6, so I actually have 12 hydrogens over here. Come over to this side, 6 times 2 is 12. What do you know? It's balanced. Now, a couple of things you should have picked up on as a reminder again. We don't change a formula. Remember what the difference is between a coefficient and a subscript. So we never change a formula to balance the equation. Now, the second thing to pick up on is the multiplication. We basically had multipliers in terms of the subscripts and in terms of the coefficients. So you want to recognize that when we're balancing equations. So look at the next one. Okay, so let's go through. Metals. I have rubidium and sulfur. Well, what do you know? I just have the two things. So let's look at this. I have rubidium, reactants, products. I have 1 in the reactants. I have 2 in the products. So I'm going to balance that. Sulfur. I have 8 in the reactants and I only have 1 in the product, so I need to put an 8 here to change that. Notice it changed my rubidium, so now instead of 2 I actually have 16. So now I need to erase that and change that to 2 times 8. I need to make it 16. So I put a 16 here and I'm balanced. Okay, pause the video, do this one on your own, and then look at what we do. So the first thing you should have done was gone through minoh. Metals, you should have recognized calcium. Ions, PO4, it's the only thing that is the same on both sides. There were no non-metals, and then I have oxygen, oxygen here, and I have hydrogen. Hydrogen here, hydrogen here, hydrogen here. Okay, so now balance it. So when you went through, you should have noticed 3 to 1, okay, because there's only 1 here, 3 to here. So this is my balanced equation. Okay, one last one. Again, pause it, do your count, follow minoh, pause it again, make sure you're balanced, and you're good to go. Okay, so you should notice there were no metals, there were no ions, there were non-metals, the nitrogen and the chlorine. There was no oxygen and only hydrogen, H. Okay, so pause it and balance. Okay, what you should have noticed is everything was balanced. So this is already a balanced equation. And that's all you're doing every time you balance equations.